Hello everybody. As you probably know, we just released a new version of the ATC Standardized Vocabularies. We called it August 2024 semi-annual release. We want to introduce it to you and guide you through other changes, which we have a lot. There will be 4 parts in this presentation. First of all, we will overview the release highlights, including some new features that we bring together with the release. After that, Masha will guide you through what is done on the content level, focusing on the vocabulary maintenance and related activities. Anna will update it on the community contribution process and the current state of the improvement activities, including the vocabulary principles and the quality system. And lastly, with Tanya, we will dive deeper into the reporting system that we constantly improve for better transparency for the users. Okay, let's have a look at the current release and see if I still can surprise you. We're talking about the vocabulary release, and in addition to us who present all these, there's a lot of people who contribute to it. So here's the team. I keep showing you faces, and I keep telling, because of these people, vocabularies are still going strong, and we even keep improving them. There are some new faces like Alexei and Anton, some already known by new faces, Dima and Polina. Thank you everybody for the huge effort you've done and continue doing. First of all, the August release is done, and we are on time. It's still not the last day of the month anymore, so we keep improving. Also, here is a roadmap. You probably know it very well. We've worked for 18 months, and today it's finished. It's a big milestone. We're working on a new roadmap now, and you will see it very soon. Together with the release, we also introduced new features. This is a big change that users asked for a while. Athena has a memory now. From now on, it supports vocabulary versioning. So let's jump to Athena and see what does it mean for users. So when you want to download the vocabularies, you would go to the download section. Then you would pick the vocabularies that you're interested in, right? So let's just click on some of them. After that, you would download the vocabularies in a usual way. And here you go. That is a new user interface, right? So first thing that has changed is the possibility to use or pick the vocabulary version, right? So the one here on the list is the current one, but can you see it? The previous vocabulary release is also available. You can just click on it and download it, right? So you will get it in the usual way as a full vocabulary bundle. Another change here is the possibility to generate delta between the versions. So let's say we're gonna generate the delta between the current release and the previous release. So the current release is selected here, then we would click on the flag to generate the delta with the older version, and then we need to pick an older version. So here we go. Once we click on download, it will start generating the bundle, and after that it will be available in your download history, the same way as the usual bundles are available now. So you can see here a couple of test runs, and the delta is generated between the two versions, right? So it's already there, it's already on Athena. You can start using this. But after you do it on a Fina interface, you will get an email. And in this email, you will find the Delta installation instructions. Also, you will get a link that allows you to download the zip file from a Fina server. Once you downloaded your file, you will get Delta. But you will get Delta in two ways. One way is the SQL script, and that is a list of SQL statements that introduce, modify, or delete the content from the vocabulary tables. All you need to do is to run it against your CDM instance, and you will get your vocabulary tables updated. Another way is the table format. You will get a full set of vocabulary tables with indication of what has changed. There is a type of the change that say whether it's an insertion, modification, or deletion. Also, there is an indication on what exact attribute has been changed, as well as the value for all of the attributes updated. This way, users can implement their own solutions on how they want to update the vocabularies. Apart from that, there is another UI change that nicely group and organize concept synonyms so that now you can see what the language of the synonym. It is particularly important for the vocabularies where there's a multi-language support. So now we can introduce more languages, and we have a lot of requests from the users. So this is a good way of how community can engage and contribute to the overall work. We thank Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center for supporting this project. The next big thing that we introduced with the current release is metadata. There have been a lot of very productive conversation with Nicholas, Paulina, Andrew Williams, and other people who were the early adopters of the CISM metadata format. And here it is. We introduce metadata for two tables. We introduce it for relationships and concepts. Let's dive deeper into it, and we'll show you a couple of examples. This is how relationships looked yesterday. You have a source concept here, and no matter how complex it is or how controversial the mappings are, you just get a full set of one-to-many relationships loaded into one single bucket. But today it's all different. First of all, you get the predicate. It is the approach to characterize the mapping, whether it's a full equivalent or uphill that goes up the hierarchy to a more general term, or downhill that goes down the hierarchy. So in this example, this one goes down, this one goes up, and these are good. Other elements tell you who, how, and by which way generated the given mappings. We have a mapper and reviewer, so that you know who you should talk to first. Mapping source and a mapping tool explain where the given mapping is coming from. So now we can easily differentiate whether it's an automated mapping produced by the machine or taken from the external source, or you look at the full semantic mapping justified by the medical terminologist. All this data is stored here in the respective fields. Relationship group is the last element, and it's really important for the cases when you get one-to-many mappings. They're still bad. We don't like one-to-many mappings, but from now on, we at least can know which maps to belongs to which maps to value, and another way around, right? So this maps to value doesn't belong to this maps to. It only belongs to this maps to because it has the same relationship group and is different to the second one relationship group here. Before that, it was all mixed, and ETL had to deal with that to avoid unnecessary inflation of records. Now it's much easier. The next one is metadata for concepts. There's only 2 fields now, but they're particularly important. First one is the reuse status. If you have a code reuse over time, like it happens in NDC or HICPIX or other vocabularies, we have a way to indicate these concepts now. So we mark them with R, and our users should be worried about them. We also have some more comprehensive system here to indicate the temporality so that you know what to expect in the future. But we'll not focus on this now. There is another element that is a concept category. We particularly needed to indicate the concepts that are not of the OMOP use case or flavors of null. We call them a junk. Believe me, you don't want these concepts in your CDM instances, so you can already filter them out. The metadata tables are still under development, so you will not find them in Athena at this point. To download them, you would need to navigate to the Odyssey GitHub and vocabulary 5.0 repository. Then you would need to go to the releases and pick the release that you're interested in. At the moment, the current one. Then you scroll down the list and there's an assets section where all the content is provided. By the way, there is another example of the table that is not yet part of the official CDM schema. It's also available via the GitHub. Please come and download the tables. And now I will hand it over to Masha, who will guide you through the vocabulary maintenance activities.
Thank you, Alexander. Hello. Well, let's move to the next slide. Vocabulary maintenance includes the 2 major blocks of changes. The regular vocabulary maintenance process performed by our vocabulary team is on the green background, and the community contribution effort is on the red one. So let's start with the vocabularies. The vocabularies we have updated during this release are highlighted in gray. And we have also added a new vocabulary, cdisk. It's on the white background. Well, let's move to SNOMED. SNOMED vocabulary was updated according to the February version of the international module, the March version of the SNOMED US, and the April version of British SNOMED module. About 1,000 SNOMED concepts were mapped, including both new concepts, such as personal history, allergies, units, providers, and old concepts, mainly vaccines and immunization codes. According to the discussion around the post-coordination of pre-coordinated SNOMED measurements, we do not perform any further post-coordination. Also, 406 standard concepts changed their domains. These changes involved mainly bug fixes, such as moving anaphylaxis and allergic reactions to the condition domain, body measurements and some other measurements to the measurement domain, and patient encounters from procedure to the observation domain, according to their semantics. We remember, however, that domains of some groups of concepts, such as symptoms and other clinical findings are now the subject of debate. And we'd like to note that no significant for ETL domain changes were made in the scope of this release. Moving to ICDs, ICD-10 CM has been updated to the latest version, effective from October 2024. Mappings of all ICD family members were refreshed following the SNOMED update and the community contribution. Next slide, please. MEDRA was updated according to the source version 27.0. New concepts were added and about 3,000 MEDRA concepts were mapped to standard vocabularies. Also, MEDRA's SNOMED hierarchy was expanded and bug fixing was performed. Let's move to procedures. CPT4 was updated according to the 2024 AA-UMLS version of the UMLS version. Also, immunization codes released by AMA in July 2024 were added manually during this refresh and mapped to standard concepts in the drug domain. CPT4's SNOMED hierarchy was expanded and more than 1,000 hierarchical relationships were added. Please note that the whole branch of anesthesia codes was embedded into the hierarchy of SNOMED. Also, 24 new CPT4 concepts were mapped to standard concepts in the procedure domain. HCPCS was updated according to the July 2024 version of the source. New concepts were added, procedure codes were embedded into the hierarchy of SNOMED, and drug codes were mapped to standard concepts in the drug domain. Also, we improved the accuracy of 27 drug codes. As Alexander mentioned above, we introduced special indicators for code reuse in the concept metadata, so you can easily find these codes. And also, following the community's request, we adjusted the dates of validity for the reused codes to ensure more accurate cohort building. Let's move to drugs. A group of drug vocabularies such as RxNorm, RxNorm extension, CVX, OMOP Invest drugs, VanDief, NDC, and DispEL were refreshed. So you may see the versions on the slide. Other vocabulary changes, let's move to the next slide, included LOINC refresh. LOINC's SNOMED hierarchy was expanded. Also, we performed the refresh of read mappings. New concepts were added to the OMOP extension vocabulary. Also, we added new concepts to the visit, CMS, place of service, and UCUM vocabularies. And we are happy to announce that in partnership with the Critical Path Institute, we introduced a new source vocabulary, the CDISC, Clinical Data Interchange Standards Consortium, a cornerstone terminology used in clinical trial data. This vocabulary includes more than 29,000 concepts, and 5,000 of them are now mapped to standard. Well, now I give the floor to Anna, who will tell us about the community contribution.
Thank you very much, Masha. One of the big parts of every release is what the community contributes to the vocabularies. And this slide shows the dynamics of the contribution to the vocabularies across the past 3 releases. And in green, you can see the simple contributions. So as a reminder, we process every and each simple contribution that you submit that is approved by the deadline, which is 2 months before the release. So if it's August -2, it's the end of June. If it's February, it's the end of December. And we do have now a stable stream of simple contributions that get in. So if you find any sort of bug or anything that you want to fix in the mappings, for example, you can submit it as a simple contribution. The same goes for new non-standard vocabularies and other use cases that are outlined in the documentation on the GitHub. So please submit more simple contributions. And you also can see that there is one complex contribution with each release. And that is because complex contributions, like adding new complex vocabulary, require significantly more effort. So with each release, we have a committee that prioritizes one contribution, and we work on that with our stewards, and we get it in. And the next slide shows the complex contribution that we processed this release. And that was EDI, which is a Korean vocabulary that has drugs, procedures, conditions. And I want to say big thank to our Korean collaborators who worked with us on this release, on this contribution throughout a couple of last months. And what they did, because that was a refresh of the existing vocabulary, they went on the GitHub where we have scripts for processing this vocabulary. They then used the documentation that we have for setting up the local instance of vocabularies on their machine. They did that. They followed the scripts for how to process the vocabulary, how to do quality assurance to make sure that the vocabulary is good. And at the end, they arrived with the set of the new content as well as the set of the mappings, which they then sent us, and that corpus was processed into the release. And they also submitted a nice pull request that outlined the changes that they made to the content of the vocabulary. And I feel that this is a very good example of how somebody who wants to maintain their own vocabulary or who wants to submit any sort of complex contribution can work with us together to get it done. Now, that being said about the complex contributions, but of course, we also want to mention the simple contributions and we want to celebrate them. And the next slide shows the table of the simple contributions that were processed in this release. And as you can notice, a lot of them are related to changes and fixes and mappings. And what I want to highlight here yet again is that if you find something that you want to change, be it domains or mappings or adding new non-standard concepts, please contribute it and we will make sure that it gets into the next release. Now we're all done with the vocabulary maintenance, so we want to switch gears to the vocabulary improvements. Masha outlined very nicely a lot of work that went into vocabulary maintenance. And now we also want to highlight two items from the improvements that we were able to work on for this release. The first is the improvements that we've done for ATC, and the second is the advances on the quality assessment and reporting. And starting with the ATC, hopefully all of you by now know that this is a very nice vocabulary that provides us with classification terms to group our drugs. So it's particularly useful when you want to select a group of drugs without not necessarily knowing which drugs exactly you want. You just want a class. And it's been a great use for the community. And the old way we created the hierarchy between ATC and RX norm is showed on the left. And it's quite a complex figure. And in fact, it's meant to be complex because what we did there is we knowledge engineered ATCs, their attributes, mapping them to the attributes of RX norm, combining them, filtering them, doing post-processing. It was a multi-step process that actually is quite complex. But what we tried this release is something that the process that is shown on the right, and you can see that it's much, much simpler. So what we did there is we took all of the sources that have explicitly stated the links between ATC fifth level codes and corresponding drugs. And that includes some of the sources from the US like UMLS, but also includes a wide range of the data sources from other countries. Z-index, Norway, Canadian data sources, Japanese data sources. And we took all of these links that these data sources give us And based on that, we built a new data-driven hierarchy. Now, it does sound simple, but the next slide actually outlines the amount of work that went into that. And we had to build a scraper that gets ATC content automatically from the website and incorporates additional attributes from the ATC website. We had to incorporate all of these data sources, which also meant that for some of the new drug vocabularies, like Norwegian drug database, we had to perform ETL to get these vocabularies in. And we also, that was one of the first times when we used the counts from the counts of the records from the network to prioritize the review of the mappings. Because of course, now the challenge that we ran into is that we have a wide range of the vocabularies, and we want to make sure that these vocabularies and their links do not disagree with each other. So in this process of review of those links, we use the counts from the network. And that sort of points to our next steps on the next slide, is that now we actually want you to give us some more data so that we can build better relationships. And we know that there are multiple data partners from Europe that converted their data to AMAP CDM. And we really want to encourage them to contribute their information about their data sources to the evidence network. So then we can reach out to them and make sure that our ATC to RX norm relationships represent their data source. And also, aside from contributing the information about your data, we just want your feedback. So if you use ATC, please download the vocabulary, please check out the new links, and please report back to us, because of course, that's the first time we've ever done this new approach, and we want to iterate over it to fix any bugs and problems that we introduced. No, that is all with ATC, and I hope I encouraged you to reach out to us and give us feedback. And now we will talk about the quality assessment and reports. And I will briefly outline what we are talking about here, and then Tanya, again, will do a deeper dive. On the next slide, this slide slightly orients you to the principles. Now, before talking about principles, I want to say that we do have multiple levels of quality assurance that is in place to make sure that we meet all of the conformance rules, that we meet all of the rules of the system that we built. And the link on the bottom outlines the full procedure for the quality assurance that we have in place. But what we will talk about here is principles specifically. And vocabulary principles is something that was introduced in this paper written by Khitrun that was published in JAMA this year, which alone provides you a very interesting read. So if you haven't read that, please check it out. And one of the things that it mentions is the principles. Now we have something around 12 principles, and the link on your right side points you to the list of those principles. And those principles are more high-level ideas that are behind the vocabularies. Like, for example, one of the examples of the principles is that vocabularies are built with an idea of use case-driven approach. So we want to cover the use cases for evidence generation, and that is the primary use case for Odyssey in general, hence the primary use case for the Odyssey vocabularies. Now, we had these principles, and we wanted to actually assess whether we align to those principles, we align to those broad ideas. And for assessing the alignment, we selected 4 key principles. And I will walk you through all of these principles in brief one by one, but this is something we also talk about in more details at the vocabulary work group goals. The first principle is the unique, going back on that slide, the first principle is the unique standard concept, which says that in the Odyssey vocabularies, there is one referent concept, standard concept per semantic meaning, and all of the source vocabularies are meant to be mapped to that concept. And this is so that we can do network research. And unique means that there needs to be only one standard concept per meaning. Now, the principle of comprehensive coverage naturally follows from that first principle and says that we need to make sure that we do map all of the source codes to that referent. We also want to make sure that all of the concepts have the right domains so that you know where to find them in the ABMAP CDM tables. And the final principle, polyhierarchy, is really one of the very useful features of the Odyssey vocabularies, where we use hierarchies to group codes and find all of the relevant codes to a given idea. And we felt that these four principles are really the key principles that we want to make sure we assess and report on. And this is where Tanya will talk more about them.
Sure, thank you, Anna. So as Anna has just mentioned, the list of vocabulary principles along with their short descriptions is published on GitHub. And along with it, in the very nearest future, we're going to publish a short general report, what we call it, describing the state of vocabularies according to these principles after the February 2024 and August 2024, the current vocabulary releases. And we are also going to accompany that with several detailed reports on the 4 key principles that Anna has mentioned on the previous slide. And along with that, surely you're going to find the code used for generating all of those reports on GitHub too, so that those of you willing to do so can generate them themselves. And now let us walk briefly through the general short report. Alex, can you please switch to it? So here you can see a report that will be published on GitHub shortly. And it is divided by the key principles that Tanya has mentioned. And let us go a bit downwards so that we can stop, for example purposes, on the predefined domains principle. So you can see that all the data is presented in tables with actual stats. Yep. And a bit lower. So here, let's look at the table for the dynamic of concept domain changes. So you can see here the domain changes during the 4 latest major vocabulary releases since January 2023 up until now. And in the first several monocolored rows, you can see the concept groups that have stayed persistent in their domains. So basically drugs stay drugs, devices stay devices, procedures stay procedures, and so on. And if we look in the last column, we can see that these stable concepts comprise around 92% of total number of standard concepts, which is quite a lot. However, if we look a bit lower, we can see groups of standard concepts for which number of transitions equals, for example, 1. This means that somewhere during a lifetime of a concept, it has changed domain. And if we look there, we can see that many of such cases have yellow boxes, observations, in one place or another. This means that either the concept has been observation previously, or it has switched to being an observation. We can see that the percentages of such groups of concepts are quite low. They're lower than 1%, but still that tells us that even though the majority of the concepts are stable in their domain, we still need to continue working on domain definitions. And let us jump back to the presentation, please, so that we could walk through our reporting process in general. So as all of you probably already know, before the release, we published the upcoming changes. There are many, they mainly touch on data layer specific aspects and the aspects that we think will be relevant for your ETL, for your phenotyping purposes. We published the shorter version on the forums and the more broad version on GitHub. And after that, whenever the release comes out, you can find the release notes, which, yeah, next slide, please. And the release notes touch on all the points already previously mentioned in the upcoming changes, as well as the more broader descriptions of the changes and total stats. And then, as I've mentioned some slides previously, some days after the release, we're going to publish the quality reports described before. So next slide, please, Alex. So you can see how vocabularies adhere to the vocabulary principles outlined by Anna. And let us go to the next slide and try to sum this all up. Basically, let's focus on why exactly should you download this new August 2024 vocabulary release. So firstly, it has a lot of new, updated, and upgraded content. There are more concepts across many vocabularies, better hierarchies, better mappings. It includes, of course, new community contributions and some bug fixing. And as Alex mentioned, the August release has some totally new features. These are metadata tables, this is a peg content table, and so on. So we encourage all of you to download and try out this new vocabulary release. And please come back to us with your feedback, with your questions, feel free to do so. And right after this call, we have a vocabulary working group meeting where we also encourage all of you to come and to give us your feedback, tell us what you think, especially if you have already had a chance to try the new vocabulary release. So yeah, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, everybody. And I think we still have 5 minutes, so maybe we have some immediate questions to answer.
Yeah, certainly. First of all, thank you so much to all of you for this presentation. If we have questions, maybe just raise your hand or unmute yourself and you can ask. Or maybe it was explained so clearly that there are no questions. Cynthia, go ahead.
Yes, I have a CDISC table, the concomitant meds, and there's both the drug name and dose and units, but there's also a column with the ATC code. Should that be mapped, or will that just be automatically generated from the information on the drug? I think that's for Anna.
For CDISC or for?
Yes, it's a CDISC table of concomitant medications.
Let me chime in, probably I know the answer. So the entire CDISC repository is not for the drugs, right? It's not for the content, because when you have the actual content of drug, you would either use the ATC or the WHO drug vocabulary. So that is not related to the CDISC, and one of them, ATC, is added to the normal vocabulary, so you can easily use it with the maps to mappings provided. But the WHO drug vocabulary is not a OMAP, and at the moment there is no good way to get these mappings because there is a licensed vocabulary and they're not easily available on the web. So
just let me, so if I get the standardized vocabulary for the drug, the clinical drug, that is the name, the dose, the units, and the form, then if someone wanted to search for drugs that are in that ATC class, they will find that record because there is some way that that standardized code is in some hierarchy of ATC codes.
Well, there are two. Yeah, I think what confused us is that you both mentioned CDISC and ATC. So ATC can be used to retrieve all drugs that belong to a certain class. Like, for example, if you want beta blockers, you can select beta blockers, descendants. We have, by the way, we will be covering that on our tutorial exactly how to do that. We'll be covering that in our tutorial on the Odyssey Symposium, so please come. And the way you will do that is that you will select the ATC class that you want, all descendants. You will exclude ingredients, for example, if you don't want ingredients, and that will give you the whole set of the drugs that belong to this class. Now, another level is whether what your source information maps to. Do you have NDC codes in your source? Do you have something else? That will point to the place in the standardized vocabularies where your source drugs are being mapped to. If they're getting mapped to RX norm, let's say clinical drugs, then this approach with ATC will work just fine for you. If you haven't normalized your drugs and you, for example, just keep them as 2 billion codes, that obviously will not get you anywhere because you're not using standard codes, you're using custom 2 billion codes. So there are sort of two levels to this problem. But if you have standard codes, the ATC will get you where you want to be.
Thank you.
And please come to the working group so we can discuss it in more details.